Soil is central to many different things. Soil health and fertility, productivity, livelihood of farmers are really central for our life, but are also central to an emerging concept, regenerative agriculture. So today we are here to discuss about environmental stewardship, productivity, farmers' livelihood under the hat of regenerative agriculture. And we are going to have a fantastic moderator and a fantastic panel. Let me introduce Dr. Hugo Campos, the Deputy Director of the International Potato Center. Hugo has an extensive experience of 25 years on climate solution, climate resilient solutions, products that are addressing drought tolerance and the stresses that we are facing right now. And he will guide us through this very important journey. And he's not just a researcher, he's also a businessman, and is leading an important research center that is really dealing every day with some of the stressors that we want to discuss together with regenerative agriculture. I'm Romano De Vivo of CropLife International, and I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Hugo. Thanks, Hugo.
Thank you. Thanks, Romana. Okay, good morning. What? Good morning. Come on, this is code to create. Good morning. That's a lot better. So thanks a lot for the brief introduction. And I believe that this theme is quite relevant. I mean, there is a lot of talking about what regenerative agriculture is all about, but I think that in many ways there are many outdated perspectives. And with our experts, we will address those issues. But at the same time, we would like to take the opportunity just to really bring in a sense of urgency. Quick question. Which proportion of the SDG goals are on track to be met in 2030? Which proportion? Who would like to go first? 50%, 75, 99? 15. Okay. Someone else? 12%. And in the SDG number 2, which relates to food security, the situation is even more concerning. In other words, what we're talking about is really critical. People depend on it. Okay? And just another perspective on the topic of regenerative agriculture. How many seasons have farmers and all of us before 2030? Let's forget for a little bit tropical countries. 7, or I would argue even 6. Okay, let's think about that. We only have 6 harvests to fix this. So regenerative agriculture is critical, but we need to bring a sense of urgency. And pulling behind that, we will claim success. Okay, so with that goal in mind, we have assembled a wonderful set of speakers. And allow me to start by Carlo. Carlo Falda, he's director of the Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture program at the Alliance Biodiversity and CIAT. The Alliance is a sister center of the International Potato Center, and in turn, we're part of the largest network for research in agriculture to deliver food security. We are many centers, and we're grateful just to have Carlo today. But also, research is not enough. We need to go well beyond science. That's why we have participants from the farmers, consultancy, and from industry. So today we have Luisa Volpe, right here. Luisa, she serves and she addresses topics such as advocacy, policy, and partnerships with the World Farmers Organization. And I believe that if there is one underappreciated job in the world, that's being a farmer, okay? Nobody really thinks that farmer is being critical. Well, they are. How many times are we going to eat today? 2, 3, 4. Without farmers, it won't be such thing, okay? So farmers are critical. But also, businesses. And we have Alessandro, so he heads the area of Ernst & Young of agribusiness for Europe, Africa, and Middle East. So we will hear and learn from him. And finally, from industry, we have Jennifer Kroll. She comes from Bayer, and she's the global head of partnerships, growers engagement, and agri-chain activation. Okay, so essentially it's about working and interacting with farmers' networks, workers, and one of those areas is the one that we're talking about today. So with that, I will leave you with the real expert in the floor today. Carlo, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be able to present in this event and try to explain a little bit what is regenerative agriculture and why we need regenerative agriculture. First of all, I really believe that regenerative agriculture holds an immense promise for the people and nature. And there are some principles that are really important, one of which, and I will elaborate further, is outcome-oriented. So we know that there are challenges, and we know that, and we heard even from the first day of this COP on the declaration around agriculture and the importance of adding sustainability and how food systems contribute to the planet. And regenerative agriculture is surely an important part of the answer to the challenges that have been highlighted during this first day. Because there is a climate crisis, we all know. We have a degradation crisis. 40% of the land is degraded. We have associated to both, actually, a productive crisis, because when the soil are not fertile and do not produce, obviously you have a production crisis. You have a water crisis, which is strongly associated with erratic rainfall patterns, etc. And agriculture, and these are not crises that can be treated separately. You need something that can address all of them together at the same time. And regenerative agriculture is one of that. And then, of course, you have another important challenge, which is the livelihood. The farmers need to increase their livelihood. Rural poverty needs to be reduced. And for this, you need to create something, as Hugo was saying, something that attracts people and youth to remain in agriculture. When you think and I give an example, the median age of Kenya population is under 18, 17.6 something. And the average age of a farmer in Kenya is 55 years old. It means that no one is engaging in agriculture in Kenya. They all migrate to different places, and that is not just for Kenya, it's everywhere. And why is that? Because agriculture doesn't offer a sustainable livelihood. So regenerative agriculture will provide also jobs opportunities and increase in income for the farmers and for the youth, and hopefully will attract them to stay in the field. So what is that regenerative agriculture? It is a set of technologies, practices that are specific to specific environment. So they aim to increase productivity. This remains crucial. Population is growing, and we need to have enough food, and adequate food, and healthy food, and safe food to feed this growing population. We need an agriculture that is capable of mitigate and adapt the agricultural and the food system to the current situation. We need an agriculture that conserves biodiversity, because this is another crisis associated, which is the loss of biodiversity and associated ecosystem services. And we need an agriculture that is able to restore the environment, the landscape, so that it goes back into production. It's not feasible, it's not sustainable to always clear new land for new agricultural area. But what is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's flexible, it's adaptive, it prioritizes the needs of farmers and communities. So it also builds, and again, let me refer to the declaration on the first day, to the traditional knowledge, to the knowledge that the communities have around the environment. And of course, obviously, coming from that, the outcomes of regenerative agriculture are related to increasing the food security, the nutrition security, the productivity, the soil health, the climate resilience, the land restoration, and the farmer prosperity. It sounds very complicated because when you dissect each of those, to monitor and to really show progress around each of these areas, you need a set of indicators. But again, science comes to help because with the opportunity of managing big data and the big data platform, you can be able to measure and to understand whether you are going in the right direction in any given landscape. So when you apply technology such as precision fertilizing, better and more adapted plant genetic resources, machinery and mechanization, digital tools, which are also very important and can really come in supporting the farmers, you need to create a system to collect data that is capable to show where if you are going in the right direction along these multiple indicators, which each of them is complex. In agriculture, we would struggle to really monitor every single one of them. Imagine when you want to monitor all of them simultaneously. And of course, you need to create capacity. You need to create capacity, and we are here in this multi-stakeholder group because it's not only the research, as I said, it's really also about addressing farmers' needs. The farmers have capacity, but they need additional capacity. And so we need to work all together in a multi-stakeholder platform for implementing regenerative agriculture with the capacity required to achieve the desired outcomes. And then you have the benefits, which of course are both at the environmental side, so more trees on farm, better capacity to mitigate climate change, improving soil health, improving the biodiversity, improving the water retention. And you have the socioeconomic, where productivity, resilience are increased, nutrition is also increased, the income is increased, and there is enough capacity for the farmers to be empowered to demand for even more. Of course, if we want to be serious, we need to have a strong partnership for that. If we want regenerative agriculture to be adopted at scale, because the challenge when you say that something is to be implemented locally and it's not a one-size-fits-all, then how do you bring it to scale if it's not one-size-fits-all? So you really need to put in place a process that allows for the different parts, different technologies of regenerative agriculture to be implemented in different contexts, different agroecologies, different climates, in the way that best fit that environment. So the process is what is really important. And for the process to be brought forward, you need policymakers. You need to have adequate policies and policies incentives. You need to shift incentives into something that really support the farmers to transition towards regenerative agriculture. You need to have the governments, you need the private sector. This is obviously essential. They are the one that provides the inputs and the capacity and the opportunity to create markets around which the farmers can increase their income around regenerative agriculture. The consumers, they need to understand the importance of consuming better and the importance of eating food that is produced in a way that is sustainable. And of course, modestly, the research as well, because this would require continuous evolution of technologies and innovations. And of course, we should not hide that changes are always complex and changes are always difficult. To create this partnership will require a big effort by a number of actors. And I think this is where really the policymakers and the private sector really needs to come together because this is where you can make the breakthrough can be made possible. If they are linked and if they set the same goals, obviously it's not a conflicting condition, but it's actually a direction where the governments, the private sector, and the farmers and the research can really work together. And I think that is what regenerative agriculture is a process. It's a process where you need an alliance of different actors. It's a process where all these actors have an important role to play. And this is a process that really needs to move from a situation in which either you are focusing on on improving the productivity, the conventional intensification, and then you can thrive, or you remain a poor smallholder farmers, into a system where you don't have to make those choices, where you can be smallholder, you can be biodiverse, you can be regenerative, and yet you can be economically viable, and you can thrive in that system. Thank you.
Okay, Carlos, thanks a lot for setting this, the stage. We will move into the next part of our conversation today. We will give you a break, okay? Now we will go into learning and getting insights from other speakers. And this is how we're organizing this event. First of all, we will have 2 questions addressed by them all, but then I believe that we will have time for any of you who may want to make questions. Please go ahead. Okay, so again, this is a wonderful opportunity. This is not only about academia, it's about having the farmers, it's about having the industry and consultancy. It doesn't really happen every single day, so let's make the most of it. And with that, let's start with Luisa. So we heard from Carlo that by and large, regenerative agriculture is an outcomes-based approach to agriculture. Okay, it has to adapt to local conditions. He was very clear about that this has to be context-specific. One size fits all, it doesn't really work in this context, okay? But also, he mentioned about the importance of going beyond agriculture. Yes, productivity, it is critical, okay? But at the same time, we need to protect landscapes. We need to protect the water bodies, and so on and so forth. So from your own perspective, and again, wearing the hat of a farmer, what are the benefits from a non-prescriptive approach to regenerative agriculture? Please enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me well? Okay. So yes, true. Regenerative agriculture is should be outcome-based. And I also agree that it should be implemented locally. We cannot implement practice in Dubai area as we do in the Mediterranean area, because the soil is different, the climate is different, the weather is different, the culture, and also the market is different. And all these elements have an impact on regenerative agriculture. But let me start from the beginning. Regenerative agriculture is a need of whom? The farmers, the society, the multinationals who have to report on sustainability budgets, the governments who have signed the Paris Agreement, whom? I feel everybody should go for regenerative agriculture. And actually, the farmers are those that are already doing regenerative agriculture. 100% in some cases, less percentage in other cases, and there is margin to improve. Fine. But the solutions don't stand all with the farmers. Farmers are ready to do their parts, but are also ready to partner with the other actors in the agricultural sector. Yes, at local level, so with the small agro-businesses there, but also with local financial institutions, because farmers have to invest in their farm to change the production patterns. So they also need access to funding. And are these financial institutions ready to dare and bet on the farming cycle? And who is managing that risks? Are companies ready to mitigate that risks? Are governments ready to establish policies that can protect the farmers in making these pathways? So it really requires a change in mindset of the overall society. Locally, yes, but also looking at the market. There's also a trade issue that we don't have to forget, because farmers are very much interested in having their soils healthy. Soil is farmers' first asset. So it's in their first interest that soils are healthy. And this includes that farmers should have effective partnership with the input sector, for example, and also need training and need to participate in research that can improve the innovation, technology, and use of the farmers. This is their first interest, really. When I speak to our network of farmers, this is the thing they always say. We know we have to fight climate change, but frankly, we are the only ones who are storing carbon, applying circular economy, keeping our soils healthy. Because without these three elements, we are not able to remain in the business. And the fact that many young farmers are leaving the business is precisely because it's so difficult to keep these conditions for the farmers. That's why there is a lot of expectation on the farmers, but also I'm calling on the other actors to be ready to partner in an equal way that can really produce co-created and co-developed solutions. Regenerative agriculture is a huge shift that requires a change also in living in the society. Because agriculture, for example, also embeds, as I was saying, the consumer's choices, for example. So consumers have to be ready to buy some products. But who has a direct communication with the consumers? Is it the farmers? Or is it the multinational companies putting the product on the shelves of the supermarkets? So who has to communicate to the consumers that regenerative food products are needed if we want to fight climate change? And also, this is related to the transportation sector. Products are moved. And as I was saying, it is related to the trade rules. Because while it is true that regenerative agriculture is context specific, it's also true that farmers can sell in short value chain in the local context, but also in very long value chains in other parts of the world. So how do we implement regeneration also in that sector? So with this, I really would like to say that some farmers are very proud of being farmers. And if they have arrived to a point where they say that the elders tell the new generations, I don't want this for you, probably there is something wrong that we have to review together. As World Farmers Organization, we are partnering with Bayer, with CropLife, and with others to try to really apply a holistic approach in support of our community of farmers. And I can tell you that farmers are still ready to embrace this challenge. But I'm also calling on a change of mindset in the other partners. Farmers are not the tool needed to store carbon because multinationals have to report on their sustainability budget. Farmers are people, are economic actors, are families, are communities, and if we want to eat, I'm sorry, we have to respect this. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's go with Alessandro. Allow me just to repeat the question. From your perspective, what are the benefits of a holistic, comprehensive, non-prescriptive approach to regenerative agriculture? Thank you.
First of all, hopefully the microphone works. I have to say thank you, and I'm really proud to be with this esteemed panel here today as well. I'm actually a farmer, first and foremost, and investor, and then consultant around it. But I just wanted to bring this in the context also where we are today. Can I ask, how many farmers do we have in the audience today? Wow. So 2 considerations here. This is another one down there. This is about probably 4 times as many farmers as we had at COP27 when we started this entire conversation about regenerative agriculture. And I can tell you, farmers are annoyed because we are talking about them, we're not talking with them. And this is why the World Farmers Organization and the other producers associations are so important to maintain that dialogue. And so, very glad for you to be here today. As a farmer, I started this journey myself about 18 years ago. And it was terrible. At that time, we didn't have the science, we didn't have the research, we were trying things out. I lost money for many years. Maybe I can afford it. 99.9% of our farmers cannot afford it. And then that made me think, hold on a second, we've got a small portion of our population, which is about, a fourth less than the farmers present in this room, feeding the rest of our global population. Yet the farmers get the smallest fraction of the profit pool in that farm to fork value chain. There's something substantially wrong on how we operate our value chain. So what we learned during COVID and also under the current geopolitical situation is that our food value chains are long, are thin, and they're fragile. And we've got a big task as farmers to feed our 10 billion people by 2050, if we get there, in a situation that is constantly marred by polycrisis. What I found at my farm is, finally, when we got soils to work, after we learned how to do that and we were able to accelerate the transition in one area, I went to replicate the same approach in another area of the farm. Guess what? It didn't work. Because the soils out there, just literally a few hundred meters away, were completely different than where we did our first trials. And then we had to go back to the drawing boards. This is why localization is so, so important. And we need to provide the information, the experience, the support to allow our farmers to create hyper-local solutions. There is one thing, which is technology. You mentioned digital solutions. These are the tools that are going to really help us, to bring that knowledge out there and bring those tools out there. When we were asked to help identify alternative bread baskets in the world to reduce our dependencies on very few areas, we started using remote sensing, for example, at scale, data lakes, artificial intelligence. And we're able to identify areas that could be developed for agriculture at a scale where we could take basically soils, marginal soils, that either were overgrazed or compacted and were non-productive today, and bring them back into production. And we had sovereign wealth funds, investors really interested in developing those. When you went out there and you built a business case around it, it just did not stack up. You could not get the return on investment that these investors required, unless we started thinking about embedding regenerative agriculture in the equation already. Because all of a sudden, I'm not just aiming to produce a crop, but also aiming to use soils as potent carbon sinks. And with the right framework, we can use that carbon sequestration to issue carbon credits and provide basically another stream of income. So our farmers are becoming miners as well. We put carbon back into the earth where it originally came from as well. So I think I'm very, I would say, hopeful that there is a solution out there. The question is, how can we do this at speed? FAO told us we've got 60 harvests left before we lose the majority of our topsoils. And I can see this on a day-to-day basis already happening. We don't have a lot of time. The decisions that we take today will affect our children. And it's our duty to start that. Luckily, we've got a blueprint. We saw what happened during COVID, when the public sector, the private sector, civil society came together and we all worked together to find a solution to something that people thought was impossible. We have a similar challenge today with our food systems and with our agricultural systems, and we need to take action to make it happen. And my role as a consultant is to help connect the dots, working with the public sector, working with the private sector, really understanding what the farmers really need, and how we can make this happen at scale, because we need speed to results, but it needs to be just as well. And just for me means it needs to be accessible to smaller farmers, and it needs to be accessible to the global south as well. We cannot leave people behind in this process. And this is the challenge that we have.
Thank you. So, Jennifer, what about you? Do you want me to repeat the question, or there is no need for that?
Sure, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So, essentially, why don't you tell us your St. Crop science perspective about how the best way to scale up, as we are hearing from the experts, regenerative agriculture? It is through a cookie cutter kind of approach, or there is no room really for anything that, unless it is holistic and non-prescriptive in this domain?
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to my other panelists for allowing me to join you today. I think the example that you shared from your own farm is the best case of why a cookie cutter approach does not work. So at Bayer, we look at regenerative agriculture as a systems approach, again, focused on outcomes, the same things that you've been hearing here. It's about putting more tools in the farmer's toolbox and not telling them what tool they have to use when and they can't use a different tool, right? So what you could do on this 40 acres, you might not be able to do on that 40 acres. And being able to let the farmer make those decisions in their own ecosystem. So looking at each field as its own individual ecosystem. So the principles that you outlined in your introductory remarks, we agree with regenerative agriculture. First and foremost is the farmer needs to be productive in a regenerative agricultural system. They need to be able to produce. Core to this is their soil health, as Luisa shared, right? This is the biggest asset that a farmer has, is their soil. And this is providing, regenerative agriculture allows a farmer to have some additional control over their soil, right? And make it more fertile, to look at opportunities to improve that soil health. So we look at it as a systems approach. We're not saying you have to do this or you have to do that, and allowing the farmer to make those decisions on their farm. I think digital tools are key to help making that happen and are a great potential equalizer, especially with smallholder farmers. So I look at a smallholder farmer in India, right? So we look at the unique problem sets that he or she is facing on her farm. And it is labor, maybe it's access to water. They're looking at methane emissions and carbon emissions due to transplanting rice. And so in a regenerative agriculture system on their 3 hectares, 5 hectares, will look like what we're bringing to that market would be a non-GM hybrid that allows them to have some herbicide tolerance, that they don't have to transplant their rice, thereby reducing their methane emissions, reducing the call for labor that they need on that farm to do the transplanting of rice, reducing the amount of water that they use on that farm as well. So that opens up new opportunities for them and their productivity. Coupled with that would be FarmRise, which is our digital tool, which gives them access to information on how to use this technology. Maybe they have access to an agronomist that they can ask about a question that popped up, something new on their farm that they hadn't seen when they tried this new practice. So it's a suite of offerings that includes seeds and traits. It includes crop protection, and it includes digital, but it doesn't mandate any of them, right? It makes those things available to the farmer. And I think that's what's really important to keep in mind here, is that it's field by field, it is farmer by farmer, country by country, ecosystem by ecosystem. And that's how we should approach regenerative agriculture. And that's the way that we get to scale, is look at it as a unique system, not make it prescriptive, and open up opportunities for farmers.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, we will proceed into the next step of our conversation. So, and we're going into question number 2. So allow me just to read it. Can you tell us what do we need to do to realize the benefits of regenerative agriculture? I think that all of you have been very clear about telling us about the outcomes, about the benefits, not only for from an economic point of view, but also for the landscape, for the people. But what is it that it has to change so that we can really realize what regenerative agriculture is all about? So in terms of environmental, productivity, and livelihoods, which is a topic that Carlo addresses. Again, we'll start just hearing the perspective of the farmers and hearing from Luisa. But in this particular case, if that works for you, I'd like to tweak a little bit the question. Because in many countries, let's say in Europe, in the US, in Brazil, yes, there is an increasing number of women becoming farmers. And some of them, they're really effective and successful. However, in Africa, where I travel on a regular basis, the vast majority of the labor on the ground is not done by men. It's done by female farmers. So why don't you address a little bit what it is that regenerative agriculture can deliver, not just for agriculture as a whole, but particularly for small female farmers, which really make a difference in Africa. Over. Thank you. It's a very simple question. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. First, on your first point on what's needed to have regenerative agriculture, I would like to say a clear definition that is shared by all. Because in our farming community, there is also some confusion on what regenerative agriculture means and what the parameters are. That's why we are also trying to participate in conversations when farmers can have their say. On the women farmers, yes, women are very efficient, especially in some communities. Women are those who stay at home, take care of the family, and they also take care of the small business, if we want to talk about smallholders in developing countries. And so they are also those that are managing the farm. What they need to understand the importance of all of this. Probably they may also need training, extension services. They need strong partnerships through their own farmers' organizations, partnerships with the stakeholders I mentioned in my interventions before. But I can say that women farmers have also a great potential to act. They are able to create, for example, community-based credits where they put sometimes, I don't know, an amount each month, and then whom of them need it, they can get it. So they are very much supporting with each other. And women are also those who educate children. So what they need is also resources and support to strengthen this education for the new generations. So as I was saying, regenerative agriculture is really changing mindsets. And as we said and we agreed, that must be outcome-based. The practices are really related to the kind of conditions that are assessed locally. So what they need is information, knowledge on what is available in terms of practices, access to products, access to finance, access to training, to extension services. I would say this is the priorities in there.
Okay, so what about if you slightly change the order, just to give it a more dynamic the conversation, and we go to Jennifer, if that's okay with you, with the same question? So allow me just to read it. So could you tell us again, from your own perspective, from your professional background, but from a Bayer's crop science point of view, so what is that it is really needed to unleash, if you will, the power of regenerative agriculture from an environmental, productivity, and livelihood improvement point of view? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm actually going to add on to your question with the women component as well, because I feel very passionately about this subject, right? So I think there's been a phenomenal amount of research done about the barriers that women farmers face, and not enough solutions actually brought to the table that address those barriers. So it's good we're talking about it, right? You have to measure what matters, we're measuring it, and now we need to take some action to overcome that. When we look at the pain points that a farmer faces, when a woman farmer faces, when we look at that, for a smallholder farmer, it is this access to knowledge, it's access to training, and access to finance is key and critical in that. There's only so much that a private sector can do. Policymakers need to allow women to have access to finance and create opportunities for women to have access to finance, understanding what's happening in the local community as well. So beyond just institutional policy barriers, what are some social or cultural barriers that are also limiting that access to finance, because that is key and critical for women to being able to recognize complete productivity. Also, women need to see themselves as leadership, right? And as leaders in this, they are decision makers in their business. They are business women, right? They are looking to be productive, to provide for their family, maybe even go beyond just providing for their family with food, and maybe providing some income for their family as well. And so I think women need to have those barriers reduced. We all need to get together and help make that happen. So from our perspective as Bayer Crop Science, what can we do on that front? It's really looking at that knowledge, right? Looking at making sure that women have access to agronomic knowledge that's appropriate for their local context. Let me give you an example. In Indonesia, we have Better Life farming centers that are run by some women. They're agripreneurs that start their own business. You can think of it like as last mile delivery, an extension of extension services, that farmers can come in, they can see products being used, they can ask questions, they can bring in the weed that's popped up in the field and said, what the heck is this? What do I do about it, right? In Indonesia, some women in their families and in their community can't go into a man-owned center and be alone in that place with a man. So we needed to look at access and having some centers being owned and run by women. And about a third of them in Indonesia are, so that women can have that access so that they can go into that space. So I'll get off my women soapbox here for a moment, unless you'd like me to stay on there. I also think youth is key to accelerating regenerative ag. So of course, I firmly believe in science and technology. I believe innovations need to be brought to the table. We need to make agriculture cool so that people want to go into agriculture and be farmers. So what does cool mean? Well, you have to have a viable livelihood that you can provide for yourself, you can be successful. I'm really excited about the potential of technology when we look at drone application, when we look at different things that could happen on the farm. I come from a long line of farmers. I have newspaper clippings of when my grandfather sold the farm, and I have a newspaper clipping of when my dad sold the farm, because we apparently just don't know any better, and we keep getting back into it. But me and my generation, I'm able to be involved in agriculture in a way that was unimaginable years before, right? So I get to work where I work, use the skills and talents that I was given to be engaged in agriculture. And so you look at the entire ecosystem of agriculture, and yes, there's on the farm. We need to have on the farm. There's drones, there's research and development, there's advocacy, there's farmer groups. I'm seeing some of our great farmer groups here in the room. So there's so many opportunities in agriculture, and we need to make sure that all of that's being recognized as an industry and as a sector, and we're encouraging people to go back into agriculture and not making it this highly regulated, overburdened, unprofitable business prospect. Who's going to pick that when you're looking at your majors, when you're going into university, or when you're finishing up with your primary school? We have to make this a viable profession to secure our foods for the future.
So, Alessandro, just to be consistent, we would like also just to hear your views about not just agriculture in general, but also with a gender point of view. Go ahead.
I'll try my best. I'll try my best. No, actually, it is a very personal, I would say, experience as well. I mean, the person who used to run our farm had to retire. Great person, great belief, great supporter. And it was time for him to enjoy his well-earned retirement, and the succession was on. And it would have been so easy to pick up from one of the many agricultural experts. Guess what? All white, all male, all middle-aged, dinosaurs like me, basically. And I was like, that's not the right person. But we still went through a proper process, and I'm so glad to say that we actually hired a relatively young lady, 32 years of age, who came back from a professional background to the farm in order to take on the management of the farm, because she believes that not only we can achieve productivity, right, as you were saying, a bond, but also to become stewards for sustainability and really making our place a better place in that sense. As a farmer, and I'm the 14th generation farmer on my farm, my job is to hand over the farm to the next generation in a slightly better state than it was before, and hopefully not mess it up in the process. And it's a big burden. But I think in this particular situation, it's more than that. This is not about sustainability. It's not about leaving behind a sustainable operation. It's about regenerating that operation and bringing it back to the next level of performance. And that is where the nexus is. What we heard today is that to achieve this, we need a multi-stakeholder approach. This is nothing the farmers by themselves can achieve. You know, we need to have the food companies, we need to have the crop protection companies, we need to have, you know, the value chain partners, the policymakers, all working together under a common understanding of what is that we're trying to achieve. And that common understanding is fundamental here. My hope is that we leave opinions behind and we go back to science. What is the science telling us we should be doing? Because that is the base that we need to start working on going forward. And we need to make that science available all the way down to the smallholders, including the Global South, in an easy way to use as well. And this is where I hope also our digital, you know, solutions that we're seeing, you know, being developed around the world are key. For me, key for success is the policymakers as well. We need to help them understand what is required. We need to guide them towards making the right choices in terms of policies. And one of the key enablers for me is we need to create a system that really allows a way for us to transfer the benefits of soil carbon sequestration into the soils to the farmers and not to anybody else, to create an additional income for those farmers that can be reinvested to then propel the system to the next level. We get it right, and we have something beautiful. Like this year, it stopped raining at our farm in April. We already get only 300 millimeters of water a year, which is about the same as Yemen. It stopped raining in April. It didn't rain until October. I was writing off our production of olives for olive oil. We hit 92% of target yield. It was unbelievable. There was a sea of green, sorry, an island of green and a sea of yellow when you looked at it from the satellite. This is the power of regenerative agriculture. The neighbors lost 70% of their production and the quality very, very poor. Yet, I'm able to sell my oil at 5 times the usual price because, of course, there is a scarcity now, so I benefit even more from an economic point of view. This is how we can really help our farmers. Make them resilient and make them create a sustainable and regenerative environment they can live to the next generations as well.
Okay, so in closing, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have an unique opportunity. We have a couple of minutes just to raise your issues, your questions you may have, your feedback, or your position. So again, let's go for it. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Tilahun. I work for AGRA in Africa.
Sorry, could you briefly explain what AGRA is all about? Not everybody might be aware.
So we are called AGRA. We used to be called Alliance for Green Innovation in Africa. We are now with a new name. We are called Sustainably Producing African Food Systems. My question is, you know, regenerative agriculture is a very knowledge-intensive practice. You have to mishmash different technologies and practices to the context of that specific community and landscape. So the traditional extension pathway we have, if it exists, the public institutions are used for inputs, yeah? Seeds, fertilizers, pesticides. So it's more of, you know, easy to carry, easy to transfer, business-oriented types of inputs. Now, the challenge we are facing is, how do you move that practice from farmer A to farmer B, let alone from one country to another country? And what type of really public and private engagements are required to take it to scale? I think that's the first question I have. My second one will be the last one, is, you know, when you compare the costs, at least in the first 4 or 5 years of regenerative practices versus a conventional one, you know, you have, farmers have a huge cost. I think the speaker has said it. So who is going to pay for that initial transition? and what type of arrangements are required, and what type of really climate finance or insurance mechanisms are required to put it in place? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So who would like to go first? Carlo, please.
Go on the second question, because I think that is a very important part, and probably also Alessandro will confirm that the transition is costly, because you have a dip and then you need to recover, and so you need that. And this is, to me, is where you really need to have this policy will to support the transition through incentives. You need because and this is where I think, going also to the question that Hugo made, it's a transformational thing. You need to transform system, you need to transform the markets, you need to transform the ways farmers are producing, you need to transform access to finance, to knowledge, and all of this. And I think that is where, and that requires money. So I think that when you reimagine a production, a food system in which production is sustainable, is regenerative, you bring back ecosystem services, biodiversity, etc., I think you need to really establish strong financial mechanism. And I think that there is another dimension into your question, and it's about consumption. We talk a lot about rural poverty, but at the end of the day, what people want is to buy cheap food. And the moment the food, and that is another two dimensions. On the one hand is affordability of diets, which by many people are not affordable, actually probably in the global south, but the majority of the people. And if the costs go up because of what you said, then those people will be even less able to afford the diet. So what is the kind of social safety net that you need to put in place to ensure that still people can have access during the transition? So I really feel that your question is really relevant, because at some point it goes really into policy decision, and of course the private sector chip in and support, and the farmers' willingness, and we heard from World Farmers Organization, they're really willing to move into more regenerative practices. But I think the decision needs really to rest on the type of agriculture that the country sees for themselves, the future of their own food and nutrition security.
Maybe I
Please,
can add to
by all
what
means.
you were saying. Actually, yesterday we were running a panel at the UNFCCC Pavilion about financing the transition to regenerative agriculture, and actually James was there as well. The key point here is absolutely what we talked about. Policymakers have a role to play there to help that transition, but I believe the financial sector has a role as well. And it was interesting. What we heard yesterday was, well, the banks think that farmers are risky, I would say, asset to invest into. And actually, there was a colleague from the World Farmers Organization there as well. She went like, farmers are not risky. But the reality is actually farmers, and maybe tackle also your first part of the question, are actually pretty much, I hope I'm talking for the rest of the farmers in the room, pretty much of a conservative and risk-averse bunch, right? And that goes to the point about how do we help them move to something that they don't feel comfortable, they don't know about going forward. I think financing with the avenues, and in particular around the context of regenerative agriculture, if we can give the evidence that we are always being science-based and not opinion-based, and we use data to demonstrate where we want to get to, and we give the evidence by providing data, and it all goes back about, if I invest my money, I want to see what's happening out there, right? If I'm providing that information back on a regular basis, I think we can bring the financial services industry with us as well, because they ultimately know that we create an additional income stream, and we create more resilience, less variability in the results as well, but they don't understand it, and we need to be able to explain this to them. The insurance companies have a fundamental role to play here, because reality is you can have the best plan in this world, and nature has a cunning ability to surprise you every year. I don't remember a single plan that I put out there that actually worked out. Every time you have to adjust and react, and so on. The insurance company can help us, the insurance industry can help us mutualize risk in the knowledge that, yes, every 5 years you're going to get a wipeout, and it's becoming more frequent now under climatic conditions, and there's nothing to do about it, basically, right? But Other areas in the world will not experience that. So it is a situation where we need to bring together the different facets of the private sector as well as the public sector together to convince the farmers. And then going back to your first part of the question, there's nothing else than showing it to them. And I remember when I got involved in agriculture in Denmark, one of the things that I put in, I wanted to put flower beds on the edges of the fields to increase pollination rates and attract pollinators. When I proposed that to the foreman of the farm, he looked at me and said, "You're crazy. I'm not going to do that." And I said, "Why not? It really works." I say, "I don't want to be embarrassed with my neighbors." I was like, So I forced him to do that. And actually, you can go on YouTube. You'll see Carsten out there on the video now saying, "Look at the flowers. Look at the bees. Look at the fields." And it really worked. Our yields went up by double point percentage. And he became a believer. And now all the other neighbors in the area are adopting the same practices because they see that they work. But you're going to get a lot of people saying that it doesn't work, you can't do it, and all that kind of stuff. And this is why we need to help with evidence, right?
Okay, thanks a lot. Jennifer, please.
I wanted to add on to what you were saying there. The farmer-to-farmer knowledge transfer is so critical and important here, and it can be a positive reinforcer or a negative reinforcer, to your point, right? So I grew up in Iowa, I live in Iowa, and there's nothing worse than a farmer having a weedy field or crooked row lines, right? Well, if you look at cover crops, it's by nature, not going to look super pretty in your field, but we need to just change that dialogue. And of course, productivity is the most convincing switching mechanism for a farmer, right? For that knowledge transfer. But I think the farmer groups become critical in this, right? That they're networked and linked with each other, sharing the information about what works and what doesn't work. If something works, that knowledge transfer will happen quite quickly. And if something doesn't work, it also happens maybe even faster. And so the last thing that I would just say on the dip, the yield dip for that conversion that a farmer faces, finance plays a critical role in here. We need to also look at conversion costs for the farmer as well, whether that requires new equipment for them to have on their farm. How can we partner throughout the value chain to minimize that conversion cost? And then there's a positive role of technology to have in this as well. So are you going to get a yield increase by switching a different input or changing your prescription and formulation? And how you can minimize the yield drag that you might have in those early years is important to look at as well.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. We have time for a very specific question. The gentleman at the back, please.
It is working. Rather than a question, maybe just to follow on from our conversation that Sandro spoke about yesterday. I think that one of the things from our perspective that's really important is when we look at what it will cost to transform food systems, there's an upper tag of $400 billion a year, additional finance. Where does it come from? 0.5% of GDP. It's a lot of money. But I think what we need to be looking at maybe is what's the cost of not doing it? We're talking about now in the food system up to $12 trillion of waste, harm, health harm, environmental harm. So I think we need to look at the opportunity cost around it. And then the last thing is, I think my challenge to the financial sector is that we begin to be a lot more rigorous in understanding risk, health risk, environmental risk, biodiversity loss risk, so that the portfolios that the private sector are carrying don't end up as stranded portfolios, in the same way that we have a risk for the oil industry, that if they keep on investing, there comes a point there's a risk of stranded assets. The same, I think, in agricultural practices. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I took a few notes, and I will just wrap it up. I'm just sharing some take-home messages. There are only 50, don't worry, okay? So we're leaving very quick from here. But first of all, farmers, they must get a better deal. Just to be very clear, they need to get a larger share of the economic benefits out of regenerative agriculture. Also, this approach is outcome-based. We need to put multiple partners at the table, not just farmers. It is industry, it is the policymakers, it is the large companies, it is the supply chains, it is insurance playing a critical role. Also, we need to find a common ground, and I really like that. A very simple definition that everybody understands what we're talking about. And finally, digital is critical. Okay, that's an enabler, but also accelerate things. And this must be science-based. And if I may, I'd like to add another one. I think that we need to tell a better story. In many cases, the scientific stories, they're kind of boring. Let me tell you an amazing example. If I tell my grandma that in some country in the world, 500,000 of tons of carbon have been sequestrated, I will put her to sleep. If I tell the same to my mom, I will make her mad. However, if I tell them about the million cars that are getting out of the roads because of that, or the million of houses that they can get heated during the winter, that's when the change comes around. It's about our ability to tell the story. And with that, I will pass the floor back to Romano, please.
Thanks a lot, Hugo. First of all, so I think we have learned quite a lot today. It's really incredible. It's fantastic. And we need definitely a better story. And we have heard about a better story. We have heard about an outcome-based holistic approach that is made of environmental, productivity, livelihood outcomes. We have heard about the fact that this is supported by a convergence of technologies, of practices, of knowledge sharing, of access, of which access to finance, to the point of James, 0.5% of the GDP, is one of the critical points. But we also need to be, I think, very clear, and I've heard something in this panel that I have not heard before. And because there are a lot of regenerative agriculture initiatives around, and you will probably be only at the first of 100 panels on this topic during COP. I mean, let's make sure that we park the concept of regenerative practices, of regenerative technologies, of regenerative knowledge. There is only a regenerative outcome that is coming clearly from the convergence of all these elements and all the partnerships, because we only, all together, we can really manage to be successful. Thanks a lot to Hugo, thanks a lot to Luisa, thanks a lot to Jennifer, thanks a lot to Carlo, and thanks a lot to Alessandro. Please join me and to all of you, absolutely.